Okay, so today we have some news, some big news that I didn't really see coming. I don't think anyone did, to be honest, unless you were behind the scenes. I knew about this stuff, but VCT 2025 update. Riot Games removes Bleed Esports from VCT Pacific and promotes Boom Esports. After careful consideration, Riot Games has made the decision to remove Bleed Esports from the VCT Tour and VCT Pacific. Bleed Esports was terminated due to its failure to comply with critical reporting requirements and other key obligations under the TPA. Removal of a team from the Riot Games esports ecosystem is not something we take lightly. However, due to persistent operational failures of the team, Bleed will no longer participate in Pacific to protect the best interest of the players and the league. The individual players affected were informed of the decision as soon as it was made to allow them to explore other opportunities as quickly as possible. In line with our commitment to merit-based qualification, Boom, the runner-up from Ascension Pacific 2024, will be promoted into the vacated slot. This change does not affect the formats for Pacific, and the league will go forward with 12 teams as planned. Now, just before we get into this and talk about the madness of it all, let's first talk about Bleed's response. So this is what Bleed said. This morning we were informed of Riot's decision to terminate our TPA and remove us from VCT Pacific. We are deeply disappointed by this outcome, but we respect Riot's decision and will continue to cooperate with them throughout the process. Over the last year, we've been in constant communication with Riot to address issues related to our deliverables in the TPA. Unfortunately, we were unable to rectify these issues in a satisfactory manner, and the decision was made to terminate our participation in Pacific. We will take some time to process and evaluate our org's position within the title. Meanwhile, we will continue to support our Valorant players and staff during this situation as we remain eligible for challenges. So, just from that statement there, it doesn't sound like Bleed are kind of contesting too much Riot's decision, right? It seems like Bleed are acknowledging whatever failures they did and seem like they understand Riot's decision. Now, of course, the first question that everyone will, of course, ask is, well, what did they do? And the answer is, I don't know what they did here, but it sounds like it was, just from this, they failed to comply with critical reporting requirements. So I don't know exactly what they needed to report, but apparently, I guess this is just they didn't respond to Riot's emails. And they say it was persistent operational failures of the team, right? So I don't think this is anything in-game. Yes, Bleed, of course, did struggle last year. Let's just put it like that. And, from the outside even, with the player moves and stuff like that, it did seem like a bit of a chaotic mess there at Bleed. But I don't think that would get you actually kicked out of the league altogether. It seems to be much more behind the scenes what's going on. Yeah, I guess they just weren't talking to Riot. Now, of course, there are quite a few different things to unpack in this whole thing. This is a pretty big decision to make from Riot. So we're going to focus on a few different aspects of it. First, let's talk about the Boom aspect of it, though, and the fact that Boom Esports, are the team that is now going to make it into VCT Pacific, despite the fact that they didn't win Ascension. But the thing is, I think there's a few things that are going in Boom's favor here as to, why this managed to happen. The first thing is about, hey, they didn't win Ascension, so should they be promoted, right? Is that fair? Well, the thing is, what might happen next year with the Ascension changes anyway, is that it is possible that two teams could get promoted. If the two Ascension teams in any league this season, let's say they don't make the playoffs in stage 2, let's say they finish as the last two teams. Those two teams automatically get relegated anyway, and two teams then will ascend. So next season, it's entirely possible that the team that finishes second in Ascension will ascend anyway. So that kind of idea, I don't think is going to stop Riot from promoting a team, because it could happen next season anyway. The other thing going in Boom's favor, of course, is that you might remember last season we had a bit of an Ascension kerfuffle as well, right? Where, for those of you who don't remember or weren't aware, the Guard won America's Ascension, but then the Guard basically just dipped out of all of esports, and so they didn't sign the TPA. And so Riot was like, well, okay, they are just gone, so I guess no one ascends. But the community were not happy with this. There was a big backlash of saying, well, the players earned that spot in Tier 1, so you must let those players get into Tier 1. And, eventually G2 ended up signing what was the Guard. And, initially I think Riot didn't want to do that because it's kind of like buying your slot in the league. But then because of the, the outpouring of anger essentially from the community, Riot was like, I guess it's a better solution than, not having these players ascend. So thankfully all of the Guard players did end up in Tier 1. Now, those situations aren't exactly the same, right? Like, a team will still ascend this season, so you could say that the players that have earned the slot are still going into Tier 1. But I think, again, this solution is just kind of easier. People will understand and accept and be kind of like, cool, you know, good for you, Boom Esports. And I think the third thing going in Boom's favor is the fact that they're Boom Esports. Right, they're an org that has been in Valorant for quite some time, right? They have committed to this game for some time. I would assume, again, I don't know, but I would assume that Boom were probably pretty close to making it to VCT Pacific anyway. I would be surprised if they weren't kind of, you know, in those last couple slots, because Boom actually made champions, the champs just before partnership. Boom were at that champs, right? They were there. So, you know, they're an org that has been here. They're most known, of course, for the zipline incident, you know, on Fracture. That was them. But, you know, they've been in Valorant. They've been there. As I say, I think they're probably an org that was pretty close to getting it anyways. But now let's talk about the Bleed perspective. And the first thing to consider, of course, is the players and the coaches, right? As Riot said, they informed the players and coaches, you know, basically as soon as they could. And Bleed actually already kind of made some of their players inactive before all of this happened. But since we have seen both Scary and the coach have announced that they are now, you know, kind of fully free agents. And it's only Crazy Guy who is kind of somewhat stuck in limbo. Hopefully, you know, by the time, you know, this all plays out, Crazy Guy will also be kind of free to explore whatever he wants. Obviously, we're kind of in the process, you know, we're kind of in the main part of maybe roster forming and stuff. So they will be a bit behind the 8 ball because of when this has been announced. But, you know, hopefully they kind of have enough time to kind of figure it out. And let's talk about them getting kicked out, because obviously this is a pretty big decision, right? This is not something that you're just going to do for nothing, right? This is a pretty hefty decision, and I think we'll put on alert to everyone else, like, hey, you can get kicked out, right? Like, you read that agreement carefully, because you can get kicked out, as we now have seen. I do think that it helps, though, that Bleed were an Ascension team, right? I do think that that perhaps minimized it somewhat on Riot's part, because, you know, they don't have to look for a kind of full long-term solution. They don't have to replace, you know, one of those initial 10 teams where they'd have to, you know, sign a longer-term contract with some other team, right? They can just promote Boom and it's done, right? Like that probably is a bit easier from Riot's perspective, you know, so maybe the threshold is a bit lower for Ascension teams, you know, getting kicked out, because it's less of a hassle for Riot to sort out. And this really is why Riot set up the VCT for Valorant in this kind of style, because by doing this, Riot has the power to do these kind of things, right? They call it a partnership system, and I know a lot of people say franchising, but it is kind of different, because in a franchising system, the orgs are paying the money to get into the league, right? The orgs are the one essentially footing the bill. But for Valorant, Riot is the one footing the bill, and so they kind of have much more free reign to just, you know, tell someone to pack their bags if they want to, right? It's much harder to do that if you're not the person that's funding the league and it's actually the org funding the league. It's much harder to tell the people funding the league to, you know, get lost. And I know that this is just an Ascension team, and so, you know, as I said, it's not as big of a deal for Riot, but still, they hold all of those cards, right? At any point, they could look at any other orgs. And I know there's been, you know, certainly last year, there was rumors about EG, like, you know, are EG getting out of esports potentially, right? Will Riot have to kick them out? All that kind of stuff. As we saw, that didn't end up playing out like that, and EG did stay in the league. But with all that said, this is still a bit of a crazy out of the blue, like, oh my God, I can't believe that this just happened. Let me know what you think in the comments down below.